You are both a historic figure and a historical actor in one of the most fraught times in American history. And in your book, A Promised Land, you wrote about the conflict between working for change within the system and pushing against it, wanting to lead but wanting to empower people to make change for themselves, wanting to be in politics but not of it. What did that mean for you in your early career, and how has it changed? How did it change when you were president, and how do you think about that now that you're out of office?
Well, I've talked about this publicly before. I was not someone who, as a young person, said, I want to be president. I wanted to be a basketball player, architect. There were a bunch of different things. Politician was not on the list. The way I came into it, I was inspired by social movements. I was inspired by, in particular, the civil rights movement that I had been too young to participate in. My role models were people like Bob Moses and Diane Nash and the Freedom Riders, and then, after I'd started community organizing and then went back to law school, this is a moment when solidarity is rising in Poland, right? And the Berlin Wall is coming down, and Tiananmen Square is happening, and the people power in the Philippines, and so you're seeing a sense of ordinary people rising up and taking control of their lives and overthrowing oppressive structures and systems. And so that's what excited me. But what I also recognized from studying with smart professors like you and doing a little reading, by the way, for young people here, reading. It's outstanding. Cat videos and TikTok's great, but every once in a while, picking up a book. What you came to recognize is that the success of the Voting Rights Act or the Civil Rights Act was first and foremost the courage and tenacity of generations of freedom fighters and the civil rights movement and Dr. King, but it was, in the end, also Lyndon Johnson. As flawed and tragic a figure as he was in a lot of ways, his capacity to overcome the constraints of his background and his politics as a Dixiecrat, and then say, you know what, at this moment in history, I'm going to help make this happen. That was important too. And figures who aren't famous in the Justice Department who made sure that the federal government weighed in on the side of equality and freedom. And that, I think, continues to be the recipe for change when our democracy is working. I do believe the most important office in a democracy is the office of citizen, that change happens because ordinary people get together and reimagine what their lives could be and push on the system. But I also think that you have to have people inside that system that can translate those impulses into laws and institutional practices. And I've been on both sides of that equation, and there have been times once I was in office where I got pushed, and sometimes it was annoying to me. But it was necessary. And it was sometimes necessary for me when I was on the outside and I pushed to hear that those who are working within government or in politics, it was important for them to be able to explain that you're not the only interest group, you're not the only constituency. There are other equities, and so we have to balance those equities. That's part of our job. And that, I think, is how a healthy democracy works. And unfortunately, I think both outside government and inside government, sometimes we get so cynical, or we want maximalist outcomes. We want all of what we want all the time, right now, and that's not how in a big, complicated, messy, noisy country like this, our democracy is going to work. Everybody has to figure out that push and pull that over time incrementally leads to extraordinary progress.
Can I push back on that?
Of course. See? It's happening already.
I'm curious in this moment in which we are currently living.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, it feels as though the people who are speaking up and trying to change our society are not, in fact, being heard, and that change is coming not from outside the system, as you suggest, but rather from within the system.
Oh, well,
and I wonder
you
if...
were asking me about what it felt like for me coming up.
Oh, well,
you didn't ask me about what the heck is going on right now. Now that's a whole nother...
No. I did have...
That's a whole nother kettle of fish.
I did have how has this changed now that you're out of office?
During my presidency, I didn't hear the out of office thing. It's changed a lot in the last few years, yeah.
Well, but the I agree with you, actually,
yeah.
But the premise that the way you create change in a democracy comes from below and not from above, I continue to think is solid. Are you rethinking that?
No, I'm not rethinking at all. But what we're also witnessing is that when the system is captured by those who, let's say, have a weak attachment to democracy, are not, well, I don't even think that's a controversial statement at this point. No, I'm actually being serious now. It was a controversial statement. Now it is self-acknowledged. I mean, if you follow regularly what is said by those who are in charge of the federal government right now, there is a weak commitment to what we understood, and not just my generation, at least since World War II, our understanding of how a liberal democracy is supposed to work. And when I say liberal, I don't mean left. I mean liberal in the sense of believing in rule of law and independent judiciary and freedom of the press and freedom of assembly and protest and compromise and pluralism. All those institutional norms and laws that were embodied in the Constitution imperfectly and then over time were expanded so that we had a basic understanding of, like, I can't just be picked up on the street and hauled off to another country. That wasn't a partisan view. That wasn't a Republican or a Democratic notion that shouldn't happen. That was an American value and norm. And so what I believe it continues to be that there has to be responses and pushback from civil society, from various institutions and individuals outside of government, but there also has to be people in government in both parties who say, well, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. And when what we're seeing right now is when you do not have those constraints and guardrails, right? When you don't have people inside of government who say, no, this is how the law works, and we should follow it. Democracy is not self-executing. It requires people, judges, and people in the Justice Department, and people throughout the government who take an oath to uphold the Constitution. It requires them to take that oath seriously. And when that isn't happening, we start drifting into something that is not consistent with American democracy. It is consistent with autocracies. It's consistent with Hungary under Orban. It's consistent with places that hold elections but do not otherwise observe what we think of as a fair system in which everybody's voice matters and people have a seat at the table and there are checks and balances and nobody's above the law. And we're not there yet completely, but I think that we are dangerously close to normalizing behavior like that. And we need people both outside government and inside of government saying, let's not go over that over that cliff because it's hard to recover. And part of the reason I think it's interesting, when I was first elected, we were in the middle of a huge global financial crisis. It had started on Wall Street, so understandably other countries were annoyed about it. And the Iraq War obviously was not popular around the world, and so our reputation and our leadership globally had dipped pretty significantly. And so I come in first year, and I'm doing a lot of travel and making a lot of speeches and holding town halls and like this in foreign countries. And one of the raps that I got from the opposition, from the Republican side, was he's on an apology tour. And basically what they were arguing was that I wasn't just going around bullying other countries and telling them that we're better than you, which I thought was a bad strategy to get them to cooperate. I don't know, that's human nature, I think. But what they always missed, and what I would always say everywhere I went around the world, was what makes America exceptional is not that it has the biggest military. It's not that it has the largest economy. What really makes America exceptional is that it's the only big country on earth, and maybe the only real superpower in history, that is made up of people from every corner of the globe. And they show up, they come here, and the glue that holds us together is this crazy experiment called democracy, and this idea that we can somehow, despite all our differences, we don't look alike, we don't worship God in the same way, we don't like the same foods, and yet, when this experiment works, it gives the world a little bit of hope, because it says it is possible for human beings who are not bound by tribe or race or blood, but are instead bound by an idea, that they can somehow work together and arrive at a common good. That's what made America exceptional. So I think we have to recover pride in that. That's what makes us special. That and our capacity through this constitutional process and representative government and an adherence to certain ideas has allowed us to get better. Not perfect, but get better over time. With just one big civil war, large exception, but otherwise, we've managed to make real progress.
You've talked about how the system has frayed since World War II, and the post-World War II years have seen a lot of things falling apart. Right. And there's a lot of different areas we could talk about, but what do you see as the biggest areas in which we're facing challenges in the U.S., or that has perhaps taken us to where we are now?
So some of these trends you could start seeing during the start of my presidency or before the start of my presidency. A couple of huge factors. I'm not being particularly original in saying this. The Berlin Wall comes down, Cold War's over. There's this period in the 90s in which the U.S. really doesn't have a competitor. And the combination of technology, transportation improvements, suddenly you have a global marketplace, right, with fewer barriers. And that process of globalization and technology creates this explosion of growth and huge amounts of wealth spinning around the globe, taking advantage of opportunities. In many ways, it was this extraordinary period of progress, because you have 1 billion Chinese lifted out of poverty. That's a big deal. You have former Eastern Bloc countries, places like Poland, or that suddenly are growing rapidly, and people's standards of living are rising. India, less so in Africa, but even there you're seeing progress. But there was a catch, because this was all driven by global capital, and that was that it created what some economists referred to as a winner-take-all economy, in the sense that if you had high skills, you already had capital, you had advantages, you had education, you could leverage that and do even better. And if you didn't have those things, you could become redundant and marginalized. And that was happening not just between countries, but within countries. And so in advanced countries like the United States, economically wealthier countries, in absolute terms, people didn't get poor, but the gap, the rise in inequality, made people feel like I'm losing ground. And this globalization was hugely disruptive. Right? So at first it happened in manufacturing, and that happens pretty early in the 70s and 80s, but then it starts happening in other industries and retail, and you get Walmart, then Walmart now suddenly has to deal with Amazon. And those economic dislocations and the capacity of some people to make $100 billion or more, and others not, and have trouble making the rent or feeding their families, that's created tensions. And if you combine that with a change in the information ecosystem brought on by the internet and then social media, and everybody carrying around this little thing in their pocket, what that also did was to let everybody know how unequal everything was. Yeah, many people know my father was from Kenya. And when I went there for the first time in 1987, I mean, this is rural. There's no indoor plumbing in a lot of areas. There's no electricity. By the time I went back, and let's say the last time I was there, 2011, 12, I was probably 13. Everybody's got a cell phone. So you have people who are subsistence farmers looking at the Kardashians. It's funny. It's a weird image. But what that does is it created both a collision of cultures. People started seeing how different others were living, and that's an assault on their identity and their status. And it also triggered all kinds of movement among peoples. The degree to which mass migration has been triggered, in part by the communications revolution, I think, is something that is not talked about enough. Because people started saying, oh, I can be here, and here's how I can organize moving to a better life. So you get this combination of things. Essentially what happens is people are feeling stressed from all sides. They feel stress in terms of their identity. They feel stressed economically. They feel stressed in terms of social arrangements and gender norms and marriage and all the institutions and religion, all the things they could count on as giving solid ground under their feet. Suddenly all that stuff feels up for grabs. And in that situation, it's harder to maintain the social trust that keeps democracy going. And so if you, long answer to what should have been a shorter, or to a good question that I should have responded to quicker. Growing inequality, a changed information and media environment, demographic change, those who used to be marginalized now wanting a seat at the table, all those things were disruptive and got people nervous, and there was a backlash. And that backlash increasingly took forms in which we don't care what we said about democracy. We want to make sure that we maintain the status quo. And that, I think, is part of what we're going through right now. And it's probably, the changes I just described are accelerating. I mean, if you ask me right now, the thing that is not talked about enough, but is coming to your neighborhood faster than you think, this AI revolution is not made up. It's not overhyped. You are already, they're probably, I know I was talking to some people backstage who are associated with businesses here in the Hartford community. I guarantee you, you're going to start seeing shifts in white-collar work as a consequence of what these new AI models can do. And so that's going to be more disruption, and it's going to speed up, which is why one of the things I discovered as president is most of the problems we face are not simply technical problems. If we want to solve climate change, we probably do need some new battery technologies, and we need to make progress in terms of getting to zero emission carbons. But if we were organized, right now we could reduce our emissions by 30% with existing technologies. It'd be a big deal. But getting people organized to do that is hard. Most of the problems we have to do with how do we cooperate and work together, not, do we have a 10-point plan or the absence of it. Public schools, we know how to teach kids effectively, but organizing school boards and making sure adequate funding is there and making sure that teachers can teach, and that's what's hard. So if you ask me right now what is our biggest challenge, I go back to what I talked about earlier. Our biggest challenge right now is we need democracy and social cohesion and trust more than ever, and it's probably as weak as it's been since I've been alive. And that's a bad combination. And so if we're going to fix all these other problems, if we're going to deal with climate change effectively, if we're going to deal with this AI revolution in a smart way, if we're going to address economic inequality, it is going to start with a reaffirmation of our ability to work collectively together. If we don't do that, then the other stuff is not going to get solved.